Analysts say Eskom can turn the corner if it converts its current debt to equity. Currently, the power utility has a 367 billion rand debt burden, and it says it's unsustainable. Last week, the power utility released the company's delayed interim financial statements, indicating that credit lines to the company had been restored. But Board Chairperson says no company can run with this type of gearing. To unpack this, we are joined by Goerge Glynos, Senior Economist at ETM Analytics, as well as Dawie Roodt, who is a Senior Economist at Efficient Groups. And we have Eskom Spokesperson Khulu Phasiwe with me in the studio. But before we start our discussion, we have just received reports that the Hawks have confirmed that they have subpoenaed Eskom to force the power utility to hand over documents linked to state capture investigation. And it's reported that evidence of some documents having been shredded has been found. And the Hawks say if evidence has been shredded, it's defeating the ends of justice. So let's get a response from Eskom. And Mr. Phasiwe is here. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you so much.
All right. What is your response, firstly, with regards to these reports?
Well, I think the starting point is to maybe correct some of these reports that we have had, where the insinuation is that the Hawks have basically raided Eskom offices, and there was some kind of a search and seizure kind of operation going on there. On the, I think on the 22nd, something like 2 days after Mr. Pagamane Hadebe and the new board have been appointed, there was a meeting between him and the Hawks, which was at Megawatt Park. They were requesting for information related to some of the contract that Eskom has signed. So in other words, this was a civil meeting where they were asking for information, which Eskom has put together and has now sent through to the Hawks. And we've also indicated that we will be cooperating with them and giving them all the access to all the information that they need, and any other employees within Eskom who may have other information that may not be contained in the formal documents that we have. They also are asked to bring whatever evidence forward so that all of these things can be investigated, because ultimately what we want as a company is to get to the bottom of the issues that are plaguing this company. Which
documents have been given to the Hawks today?
Well, essentially it's information related to the coal contracts that we have signed previously. Yes.
And then if there are reports of documents being shredded, do we know if the documents that you have that could be needed in the future by the Hawks are safe? And who is shredding the documents?
Well, the information at my disposal is that all the information that was requested by the Hawks have been submitted to them. So in other words, if there's any shredding of documents that has happened, it's probably related to other things which are not related to what the Hawks are doing. But even in that case, then, we, as a company, we are saying, if anyone has shredded any documents, so clearly they need to explain to management as to who that person was, why did they shred that information, and then the matter will be taken from there. But in terms of the specific one that the Hawks have been asking for, none of it was shredded or none of it was unavailable. All that information has been made available to them, and the indication is that more information as the documents are prepared will be forwarded to the Hawks, because we are willing to cooperate with them.
Right. Thank you very much for clarifying us on that. Let's now go to our topic of the moment. As I mentioned at the beginning, that Eskom says that it can turn its debt to equity, and currently the power utility has a debt of about 367 billion rand, and it says that it's unsustainable. Chairperson of the board, David Mabuza, said that no company can continue with this kind of gearing. So let's get our analysts to give us their perspective on this. Let me start with you, George. Do you think that this idea of a suggested debt to equity conversion is a right move?
Well, I think it's a technical accounting move that effectively just shifts the debt burden off of Eskom's books. So to the extent that it takes care of some of the gearing issues, yes, it might accomplish something. But, you know, I have a problem sometimes with doing this. It depends to a large extent who is going to convert this debt to equity. And then there's a question of oversight as to how you value that equity afterwards. Because if it's the likes of the PIC that's effectively going to convert its debt to equity, then you've got a situation that poor workers effectively are going to be helping to fund Eskom. If it's the government that's going to do this, well, then it's the taxpayer that's on the hook for swapping that debt into equity. And if it's private companies, they have to be happy to own equity in a company that up until now hasn't been run particularly well. So if you're going to go down this road, that's all very well and fine, but it's got to be accompanied by a very rigorous turnaround strategy that is believable, that's got credibility, that actually stands a good chance of working out, or else you're just effectively writing off debt, and that's not necessarily in anybody's interests if all it does is perpetuate bad behavior.
Dawie Roodt is in our Pretoria studios, and he's from the Efficient Group. Dawie, do you think this is a viable option?
Well, yes, I agree with George, but I just want to add one or two things here, and that is we have to understand that Eskom call themselves a company, but it's not really a company. Nominally they are a company, but they belong to the state. They've got things like boards and chairman and all that, but in reality, let's accept that, is that Eskom is just a division somewhere in one of the state departments. So although in name it's a company, it really belongs to the state. It's actually part of the civil service. That is point number one. Point number two, we have to understand very carefully, and that is that if you convert equity into debt, you have to remember that you take on more risk. Because if a company goes into liquidation, the debtors will get their money back first, and if there's money left, then the shareholders will get that money back. The third point that is important, that one of the biggest investors in Eskom, of course, is the Public Investment Commissioners, but they do not have any money. The PIC invest money on behalf of the Government Employment Pension Fund. So it's government employees investing money in Eskom. So essentially, in a way, first of all, Eskom, PIC doesn't have any money, but secondly, government maintains or keep on their control at Eskom, and I think that is part of the reasoning behind this. So the short answer is, in the current environment in South Africa, I don't think this is the right answer, because simply what is going to happen, we're simply going to throw good money after bad. If this is a case of actually privatizing Eskom, then I certainly will be in favor of this, but I don't think that's the idea behind this.
Now, if I go back to George about the future action that government has to take in as far as providing future equity investment into Eskom, do you think that that still has to happen, given that David Mabuza has said that the company cannot continue in this kind of gearing?
Well, I mean, I completely agree that the company can't continue like this. You know, I mean, it's been on a steady path of degradation for a number of years now. The attraction and something Dawie alluded to of privatization is that you start to introduce real levels of accountability at a board level into Eskom, and you do get it to run like a properly organized company. So the idea for me, and I wish it's a narrative that we could debate a little more frequently, but the idea for me would really be to start talking about privatizing electricity in South Africa more generally, and where government becomes more of an enabler rather than the driver of electricity as it's been up until now, which is why I was very pleased to see that we've now progressed to the point where Eskom is happy to purchase electricity from independent private producers of it. I think that's a step in the right direction, but there's just so much more that could be done. Partial listings, all sorts of things that there are options available out there that could assist in not only lowering the debt burden of Eskom, but injecting a whole bunch more capital, not just into Eskom as a company, but into South Africa's electricity infrastructure as a whole. And so that's the general direction I'd like to see things take. If we do have to head down that sort of path, I suspect that we could make quite a lot of progress in buttoning down Eskom into a viable state-owned enterprise, at least partially listed, I think it would. I think we'd be talking a far improved electricity environment.
Now, when you look at cash injection at Eskom, it's something of a greater concern. I mean, when you look at their liquidity assets, they dwindled to about 9 billion rand at the end of September from 30 billion rand a year previously. Do you think that at this moment, Eskom needs a turnaround in as far as cash injection is concerned? Number one, when you look at how much the municipalities owe Eskom, the debt has risen from 9 billion rand to 12 billion rand. I mean, that is something that is of much concern.
Yeah, are you asking me or Dawie?
I need to respond to that. I'll give him a chance.
Yeah. Look, so I think you know what you've touched on there is a broader issue that needs to be tackled, and that's this general non-compliance and maladministration that extends far beyond just Eskom and goes into the municipality level. Again, it comes back to an issue of accountability, and if there isn't accountability, sometimes we can get so wrapped up in trying to provide social services. But of course, nothing is for free. It all has to get paid for at the end of the day. And if it doesn't get paid for, we sit in an unsustainable situation as we're sitting right now with Eskom. So this money does have to get paid back. We need to find mechanisms in which to make sure that it gets paid back, or else we're going to be living with a defunct electricity sector for a number of years, where once again it will be down to the taxpayer to sit and bail out another state-owned enterprise, and that's in nobody's interests.
Right. So, Dawie, Eskom, you know, had its credit rating downgraded by Moodys from BA1 to B1, which indicates a highly speculative rating description. Given the situation, will it recover from this?
Well, I'm afraid in the current situation, certainly not. George is absolutely correct, and that is that Eskom is simply not a going concern. That means that they are, for all practical purposes, a bankrupt company. And it's not really a company, it's part of the civil service. And just by the way, you know, about 2 years ago, the state already converted so-called debt into equity to the tune of about 60 billion rand. So it doesn't change anything, because the state cannot own more than 100% of Eskom. They already own more than 100% of Eskom. So Eskom is certainly not a going concern as it is, and something needs to be done. And I think what is probably going to happen in the short term is that the money will come from the taxpayer. We're probably going to see something in a budget where the Minister of Finance is going to simply give Eskom another couple of tens of billions of rands, because the alternative is just an Eskom that's going to go down the tubes. I suspect with transferring this huge amounts of money to Eskom, with the financial problems of the fiscus itself, we're probably going to see another downgrade as well. So that's what's going to happen in the short term. On the medium, longer term, we have to make an ideological decision. Are we going to continue with the state providing electricity or not? If we keep on with the state being involved in electricity provision and distribution and retail of electricity, then we have to accept that the service is going to be subpar, and we're going to have this badly managed companies called Eskom. And then we will have to keep on bailing them out. And we will have to accept that we're going to be downgraded continuously. Or we can take the alternative option, which is politically not so easy to do, and that's to sell these state-owned enterprises called privatization. And I'm afraid we need to cross that political Rubicon, and I'm afraid we're certainly not there yet.
Well, the person now who should be concerned is the consumer. If Eskom wants 19.9% of a tariff hike, whereas NERSA has given Eskom only 5.5%. Now, this is going to be too much for the consumer, but Eskom, on the other hand, is limping. So where do you draw the line?
Well, yes, there is. Currently, at the moment, what we have electricity prices that are quite expensive, electricity prices that keep on going up. We've got a horribly managed so-called company called Eskom. I've done the calculations, and it's costing the South African economy literally hundreds of billions of rands in lost production because of Eskom. And it's not only a matter of money, it simply has to do mostly to do with political interference and bad management. So we have to accept that, we have to realize that in the short term, inevitably, the taxpayer will have to come to the party and bail them out financially. But thereafter, do not keep on throwing bad money or good money after bad. We have to make some structural changes as far as Eskom and the other state-owned enterprises are concerned, and that means that we have to break them in smaller pieces and get the private sector to do the job. Because obviously, which is what is very, very clear, is that the state and politicians are not good at running companies, and Eskom is an excellent example of that.
All right, I'm going to have to release you, gentlemen, under the circumstances. Thank you very much for making time to speak to us right here on News Today. Goerge Glynos, Senior Economist at ETM Analytics, as well as Dawie Roodt, who is Senior Economist at the Efficient Group, talking to us live from our studios in Pretoria. Now, back to the studio. Khulu, you've heard the gentlemen giving their analysis on this. Let me go back to the issue of cash injection. Municipalities and government, they seem to be giving Eskom a problem in as far as recovering their debt is concerned.
A big problem indeed. As you correctly say, until the end of September, municipalities across the nation were owing Eskom just over 12.4 billion rand. Right now, as I speak to you, at the end of December, that debt had escalated to 13 billion rand. So clearly there's a problem there. And the same municipalities that are owing Eskom are the same ones that the Minister of Water Affairs had previously indicated that they were owing the water boards across the nation millions and billions of money. So clearly there's a problem which goes beyond Eskom. We need intervention from, I would say, government as a whole, primarily from COGTA, and also support from SALGA and other government institutions, including the National Treasury, to find a way, a mechanism as to how this municipality should pay. But we need that money, because Eskom wouldn't be in a difficult financial position now if that money had been recovered.
Is Eskom also expecting to recover money from the investigations that are being conducted by the Hawks now, given that the current management and board is still new, but it wants to recoup these finances? Do you expect that this money will be finally retrieved?
Well, late last year, Eskom had written a letter to McKinsey and Trillion, indicating to them that the monies that were paid to them, which is over 1.6 billion rand, was paid unlawfully, and therefore that money has to be paid back. McKinsey has been quick off the mark to say that they are willing to pay the money back to Eskom. So we will see as to how that process will unfold. So obviously we now have some dynamics where Eskom has, the previous board of Eskom at least, had written another letter to McKinsey saying there was nothing wrong with those payments, those kind of dynamics. But it's now a matter which is under investigation by the new board to get to the bottom of it. But ultimately, if there's any wrongdoing there, as previously indicated, then they need to pay back that money. The board of Eskom, the new board, has also indicated last week that there are just over 600 contracts that they are currently busy reviewing. About 160 of those are of amounts over 1 billion rand, and then 500 of those cases related to cases less than 1 billion rand. So clearly this money has to be recovered somehow, or people who are implicated then have to face the wrath of the law.
On a parting shot, when you speak to ordinary citizens and their response to Eskom's request from NERSA on the tariff hike issue, they feel that 19.9% is exorbitant. In their words, they say it's ridiculous. What do you have to say about it? I mean, like, you get 5.5% and you're asking 19.9%.
Well, the calculation was based on the formula that the regulator is using, plus also the requirements that Eskom has. So currently, obviously, as you correctly say, we got 5.4%. Believe it or not, it means that out of the 5.4%, actually Eskom is only getting about 1.3%. The other 4% is going towards the purchase of electricity from the independent power producers. But the management and the board have indicated that there's more scope for us to engage with the regulator. And last week on Friday, the Minister of Public Enterprises issued a letter saying that there's still a scope for more discussions with the regulator NERSA and National Treasury to find a way in which they can assist Eskom in terms of the tariff adjustments. So we will cross that bridge when we get there.
Right. Eskom's tariff, Eskom's credit rating being downgraded to B minus from B plus by Fitch, as well as the Moodys downgrade that I've alluded to earlier. What is Eskom going to do? We had Deputy President of the country saying at WEF that Eskom doesn't only have to look at international banks, they also have to source funding from the local banks. Has the new board considered where money has to be obtained?
Well, yes. Almost a week into his job, Mr. Phakamani Harebe and the executive team went to meet with the local funders here in South Africa. And the discussions, as he had said previously, were so productive that there has been, I would say, an in-principle commitment for them to, from the market to assist us in terms of closing the 20 billion rand funding gap that we require. So in other words, before we even go out to the international bond market, we need to make sure that we have support locally, and already there's indication that actually they are willing to help us. The issues that they had raised before were primarily related to the board, having a new board, or people who are with strong business background, and we currently have them. And then the other issues around corporate governance are still being dealt with, which is giving comfort to the market that we are doing something and we're on the right track.
Right. Mr. Phasiwe, thank you very much for making time to speak to us today.
Thank you.